Okay, we're into the part of hockey where I'm very familiar because this is kind of what I grew up with. Although the divisions are wrong, we now have 21 teams in the league. And numerous teams in this 21 team league have moved. So the magnets that are on the board are for where they've moved to. And again, it's part and parcel of this series, but I'll go through this and I'll announce it as the teams that they are. Montreal Canadiens 47, 20, and 13. Of course, they've won 4 straight Stanley Cups coming into this season. The LA Kings 30, 36, and 14. So Montreal doesn't get challenged for the division title at all. Pittsburgh 30, 37, and 13. The Hartford Whalers join the league at 27, 34, and 19. And the Detroit Red Wings are last at 26, 43, and 11. The Adams division. Buffalo leads that one, 47, 17, and 16. They edge out the Boston Bruins, who are 46, 21, and 13. The Minnesota North Stars, 36, 28, and 16. So Minnesota's getting better. And that's key. Because, again, I really commit to watching and being obsessed with hockey a year after this. 35, 40, and 5 is the record of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So they only win one less game than Minnesota, but they don't get the ties. The Quebec Nordiques come in. They're 25, 44, and 11. The Patrick division. Philly leads that one. Wins that division with a record of 48, 12, and 20. Followed by the New York Islanders at 39, 28, and 13. Then the Rangers at 38, 32, and 10. The Atlanta Flames, this is the last year they're the Atlanta Flames, by the way. 35, 32, and 13. And Atlanta's just, it's not working. So they're going to end up in Calgary. Spoiler alert, it was up there. Anyways, the whole time. The Washington Capitals, of course, keeping their place in last, 27, 40, and 13. But ahead of a couple of teams in the league well enough that you could say, well, Washington's moving up. They're not a playoff team yet, though. I think they were 17th that year out of 21 teams. The Smythe division. Chicago leads that division, 34, 27, and 19. It is still the weakest of the 4 divisions. St. Louis is second at 34, 34, and 12, followed by Vancouver, who have a losing record until 1991. 27, 37, and 16 this season. The Oilers, 28, 39, and 13. This is the last time you're going to see the Oilers below the Canucks for a while. Then the Winnipeg Jets, who are 20, 49, and 11. Remember, they got robbed during the 1979 expansion inclusion draft. And then the Colorado Rockies at 19, 48, and 13. And the Rockies are losing money. And even Don Cherry can't save this one. They're not in good shape. The Hart Trophy goes to Wayne Gretzky of the Edmonton Oilers. You may have heard of him. The Art Ross goes to Marcel Dion. He's tied for points, but he has more goals, so Dion gets the award. The Norris Trophy goes to Larry Robinson of the Montreal Canadiens. The Calder Trophy goes to some kid named Ray Bourque out of Boston. We'll see if he becomes anything. I don't know. I'm on the fence. The Vezina Trophy, Bob Sauvé and Don Edwards of the Buffalo Sabres share that. The Jack Adams Award goes to Pat Quinn of the Philadelphia Flyers. Remember, if you win this award, you're going to get fired. The Lady Byng, Wayne Gretzky of the Oilers gets the Lady Byng as well. The Masterton goes to Al McAdam of the Minnesota North Stars. The Pearson Award goes to Marcel Dion of the LA Kings. So that's kind of a bragging right for him. Gretzky's first year in the NHL. Dion is still seen by his peers as the best player in the league. The Conn Smythe goes to Brian Trottier of the New York Islanders. The Patrick Award goes to, and this is for growing the game in the States, Bobby Clark, Ed Snyder, Fred Shero, and the entire 1980 U.S. Olympic team. Of course, Clark, Snyder, Shero, this is for the Broad Street Bullies and for what they were able to do in the States. And it's a strange thing because you have people that are going to say, well, you know, fighting keeps people from watching it. There's a lot of people who say, oh, it's just that it's fighting and fights break out all the time and I don't want to watch that. So, you know, hockey getting rid of fighting makes sense. And yet here's the NHL going, hey, that team that beat everybody up, congratulations. You helped grow the game in the U.S. Doug Wickenheiser's your #1 draft pick for the Montreal Canadiens, drafted ahead of Denny Savard. He plays 556 games in the NHL, 111 goals, 165 assists, 276 points. And if you want to see a guy who's been considered a bust for years, Wickenheiser's it. Now, I just on the fence on this one. Wickenheiser had a couple of good seasons. He played for Montreal, St. Louis, Vancouver, the Rangers, and then ended up in Washington. His stays in Vancouver, New York, and Washington weren't anything to write home about. So Doug Wickenheiser is your number one pick ahead of Denny Savard, and Montreal fans were quite salty about it at the time. Your first team All-Stars, Marcel Dion, Guy Lafleur, Charlie Simmer, Larry Robinson, Ray Bourque, and Tony Esposito. Second team All-Stars, Wayne Gretzky, Danny Gare on right wing. Danny Gare. How many people out there remember Danny Gare? Anybody? Come on, somebody got it. Steve Shutt, Borje Salming, and Jim Schoenfeld with Buffalo is a surprise as a second team All-Star. Schoenfeld was a hard-nosed defensive defenseman. So seeing him as a second team All-Star, it's surprising. And Don Edwards, the goaltender from the Buffalo Sabres, who is going to play for a number of teams. Or had already, I think, well, let me see. We'll go through Don Edwards later when I eventually do a video on Don Edwards, because that'll eventually happen. August 16th, 1979, Joe Mullen is signed by the St. Louis Blues as a free agent. September 28th of the same year, Dino Ciccarelli is signed as a free agent by the Minnesota North Stars. They would both go on to be Hall of Famers, signed as free agents. March 18th, 1980, Butch Goring is traded to the New York Islanders for Dave Lewis and Billy Harris. So Billy Harris, of course, a number one draft pick years earlier by the New York Islanders, but they knew they had to change something. They had failed in the playoffs for 4 years, and they had to change something. They knew they had to beat teams like the Flyers, the Bruins, the Canadiens. They had to be good enough, and they felt Butch Goring could help get them there. They then went undefeated in 12 games at the end of the year. So the New York Islanders ended that year really hot going into the playoffs. The Chicago Blackhawks, they won a playoff game, which means that their record for playoff losses in playoffs is ended at 16. They lost 16 in a row in the playoffs, and that's a record that stands to this day as far as I know. Nobody's lost 16 in a row. Nobody's lost 4 rounds in a row or 3 rounds in a game. It's insane, really. Gordie Howe makes a playoff appearance for the 20th time as a member of the Hartford Whalers. They don't last very long in the playoffs, but it's still there. October 10th, 1979, Gary Smith plays for his 7th team. Need an S at the end of that. Don't need that at all. Yeah, Gary Smith plays for his 7th team, which is a record for goaltenders at the time. That's why he was called Gary Suitcase Smith. November 28th, 1979, another Smith, Billy Smith, gets credited for the first goal that a goaltender's ever been credited for. It was an own goal by the Colorado Rockies defenseman Rob Ramage, also a number 1 draft pick. And so it's just he was the last Islander to touch the puck. So he didn't score it into the net. That will wait until 1987 when this Hextall guy ends up doing something similar to that. I don't know if he's going to end up being anything either. I haven't gone far enough in the history series yet to find out. January 2nd, 1980, Gordie Howe plays in his 5th decade. Nobody's going to do that again. There's no way that a player's going to play in 5 decades again. It's just not going to happen. It is an amazing record. And then in the 90s, he played a professional game for, I want to say, Detroit Vipers or Houston Aeros. Anyways, I know he played a game in the 90s as well because no NHL team would give him a shot. He was like, I want to play one game. And NHL teams were like, pass at that point. He was at that point, it was his age, it was like, it's a great publicity thing, but pass. February 24th, 1980, Wayne Gretzky becomes the first hockey player in history to score 100 points before his 20th birthday. So Gretzky is tearing up the league already, and he's 19. So again, when we talk about players now, they peak in their early 20s. Gretzky's absolutely a case of that. Big time. All of his scoring records were in his early 20s. The preliminary round that year, so we're going to get to the playoffs now. Philadelphia swept the Oilers in the first round. So Philadelphia gets there. The preliminary round's now a best of 5, and there's 16 teams in the playoffs, and the byes are gone. Which means 16 out of 21 teams make the playoffs. Because it's the NHL, so they want as much playoff revenue as possible. The Buffalo Sabres beat Vancouver in 4, so Vancouver got 1 win, and that's what I remember. I remember Buffalo playing Vancouver. I was all excited, and Vancouver was just overwhelmed in that series. I remember my excitement didn't last very long. Even as a little kid, I was like, oh, Vancouver's not that good. Because I didn't know that you look at the standings, and Buffalo had 47 wins, Vancouver had 27, and there was really no comparison between the two. But, you know, I didn't realize that they were 40 points behind Buffalo. All I knew was it was playoff time. Let's play. Let's go. Come on. And it just didn't work out. Montreal beat Hartford. They swept them. So that's why I said, you know, Gordie Howe with the Whalers. It was a short run. But that was his 20th time in the playoffs, which is a record. The Boston, or at least at this point it's a record. The Boston Bruins beat Pittsburgh in 5. So that was a long series, and it was the only one that went 5. The Islanders beat LA in 4. Minnesota sweeps Toronto. So Toronto, and I've talked about how they're tough in the playoffs, they were less tough in 1980. We're getting into the Ballard years. Chicago sweeps Minnesota. That's where the Chicago Blackhawks break that 16-game losing streak. The New York Rangers beat the Atlanta Flames in 4. So the Flames are good enough to make the playoffs quite often. They have a plus 500 record quite often, and they just can't draw. And the team spins its wheels in the playoffs, and they're going to go to Calgary. So let's get to the quarterfinals. The Philadelphia Flyers beat the Rangers in 5. Buffalo, coming off of their 4-game series against Vancouver, sweeps Chicago. So Chicago breaks that 16-game losing streak, and in the next round they're like, hey, let's start a new one. And they lose 4 in a row. Minnesota beats Montreal in 7. The New York Islanders beat Boston in 5. So the Bruins are falling off the map. Montreal's fallen off the map. That huge, big 4 in a row Stanley Cup, we're going to go for 5 and try to tie the record, is broken by the lowly Minnesota North Stars, who had 36 wins that year. And that's kind of key because, you know, you get Dino Ciccarelli, you got Bobby Smith, and things are looking pretty darn good for the Minnesota North Stars right now. There was a lot of buzz about them in the early 80s, like these guys are going to do something good. This could be a future Stanley Cup team. Look at the players they have. It just didn't work out. In the semifinals, Philadelphia beats Minnesota in 5, and the Islanders beat Buffalo in 6. So the New York Islanders go to the Stanley Cup for the first time with Butch Goring, and Bobby Nystrom's about to become a legend, and the Flyers go back to the Stanley Cup Final again. The Flyers lose at home 4-3 in Game 1. Fear not, Flyers fans. In Game 2, you win 8-3. So it's a split series going to Nassau. The Islanders win 6-2. The Islanders win 5-2. So they're up 3-1. They don't lose at home. Philadelphia wins at home to force it to 6 with a 6-3 win. And the Islanders win in overtime. As I said, Nystrom becomes a hero. 5-4 win for the New York Islanders. And the Islanders are your Stanley Cup champions for 1980. And this is the start of another dynasty. Remember, again, when I came into watching hockey, there was dynasties errors. Just dynasty. Is this the next dynasty? And then the Oilers were a dynasty. And, you know, it kind of felt like there was always going to be dynasties. So NHL, the way that it is now, is completely different. Your playoff leaders for the year. In goals, Barber and Trottier tie for the lead with 12. Assists, Ken Linsman with 18. And for points, Brian Trottier 29. And, of course, he takes home the Conn Smythe Award. For wins, Billy Smith sets a new NHL record with 15. Up until then, you couldn't get any more than 12. And Pete Peters, 8. So Peters doesn't play the whole playoffs. Phil Muir has the other 5 wins for the Philadelphia Flyers. But in terms of where the game is, Butch Goring absolutely gives the Islanders that little bit extra that they needed. Just that little bit to put them over the top and make them Stanley Cup champions. So there you go. Your 1979-80 season. And your winners, the New York Islanders. And we're going to end up seeing this actually being New Jersey within a couple of videos. And we'll discuss some other moves that get made because this entire division alignment is wrong. I mean, look at it. Before I go, I wanted to do this. Look at this. Hartford got added to the Norris, so LA now has to go to Hartford. They added Quebec to this division, which is fine. This division is close, but this is Minnesota, remember. This division is fine. Washington got added to what would become the Patrick. This is as close as we're getting to the real thing. And then Winnipeg gets added here, which might have made Vancouver feel better. This isn't feeling quite as bad as before. So the travel's getting a little bit better because now they've got Edmonton and they've got Winnipeg, but still it's going to get a lot better than this once Atlanta's actually in Calgary. But when they're Calgary, the first season, they still play in the Patrick Division. So we'll get into that tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.